My name is Harini Nagendra. I teach ecology and sustainability at Azim Premji University. For many years now, my colleague Seema Mundoli and I have been conducting research on what we call peri-urban spaces, the spaces around Bangalore. And one of the very characteristic features of the ecology of the peri-urban space, especially in Bangalore but across Karnataka, is what we call Gunda Thopes. Gunda in Kannada means round, and Thope is of course a word which is the same whether it's in Hindi or Kannada or many languages, which is a plantation. So Gunda Thopes are wooded groves of trees called Gunda because they are round, and they could be jackfruit, they could be mango, they could be tamarind, they might have a sacred peepal tree or a banyan tree somewhere in the center, maybe a couple of idols. Every village often had several of these, or sometimes multiple villages might share a Gunda Thope. And these were very important spaces for them for people to rest and travelers and passers-by to take shade and rest, for cattle to graze under the jackfruit and the tamarind. The fruits would be used by the village or given out for contracts. Otherwise, community festivals would be held here. Occasionally, the wood would be cut and used for constructing the temple or helping to construct homes for the poor. So these were very core community spaces, and they provided what we call ecosystem services for these villages that lived around these landscapes. If you look at local legends and local oral histories, they will tell you that Hyder Ali actually set them up because Hyder Ali was trying to get commerce set up in the Mysore kingdom. And so he wanted people to be able to move from one village to another to take, whether it's textiles or other kinds of wares, and sell them. And so he created these thopes at every half day's travel by a bullock cart so that someone who was traveling could take shelter from the midday sun, sleep there from maybe 12 to 2 or 12 to 3, eat some of the fruits from the tree, refresh themselves, and then proceed again. So these were the kinds of spaces that were set up. And like I said, they were extremely common across the entire landscape. For instance, in Bangalore, you will find places called Gunda Thope layout, which tells you that there was a Gunda Thope. But now there is no Thope at all. Most of it is barren. When Seema and I did this research across peri-urban Bangalore, we found that in a large area, when we looked for about 40 to 50 Gunda Thopes, we found 2 or 3 still in existence. So that's a scale at which these are disappearing. And even more frightening, we realized that they're disappearing from local memory, because if you talk to the local people and these thopes were there and such an integrated part of the landscape 20, 30 years ago, now they might not even remember that it existed and will not be able to tell you where the original location was. So we thought of putting a book together that talks about the loss of this history, and that's why there's so many, where did our Gunda Thopes go, the book came. And it's a conversation between Lady Lakshmamma from a village who has moved outside to the city after she got married. And she comes back to find her beloved Thope gone, but only one banyan tree called Maranna who was still left. And she has this conversation with Maranna, which tells you a sense of how the Thope was tied into the history of the village. There was a stream, the Pandavas played there. There's a lot of culture and history and ecology which all bound the village together. And now with the disappearance of the Thope, the history of the village, the sense of lived history is gone, and the village is sort of falling apart. So during this conversation, Lakshmamma and Maranna talk about how they can revive the language of the Thope and the culture of the Thope across cities like Bangalore, but also across the state of Karnataka and indeed across all of India. We hope you enjoy this reading of the book, and would love to hear back from you in terms of conversations about how you think we could take these forward in your cities.
Lakshmamma and the Thope. Lakshmamma is visiting her childhood home after many years. She had left her village located in the outskirts of Bengaluru city as a young bride of 18. After her marriage, she lived in a crowded slum in the city with her husband, who worked as a mason, and her in-laws. Lakshmamma had very few opportunities to visit her village since she left. Life in the city had not been easy. She'd been busy taking care of her family, raising her children, and working as a domestic help in several houses to make ends meet. Now in her 50s, Lakshmamma, who had been to her village nearly 10 years ago, had come for a short visit. But she had returned to find that the village looked very different, a little like the city itself from where she had just arrived, with offices, apartments, layouts, and shops selling all kinds of items. The evening she arrived at her village, Lakshmamma went for a walk on a familiar path, a path she had often taken as a child while herding her goats. The path took her from her house through the center of the village, beside the Kalyani with its peepal tree. Lakshmamma's final destination on this walk was the Gunda Thope, located at the other end of the village. Under the shade of the trees in the Thope, Lakshmamma had spent many happy hours as a child. As Lakshmamma walked towards the Thope, she gazed around the village. The village she remembered from her childhood was so different. A village she had thought to be timeless and unchanging. Her grandfather had told many stories of a village and how old it was. According to a legend, the Pandavas, the five brothers from the epic Mahabharata, had halted at this village during their exile. One day, while waiting for their pot of rice to cook, the Pandavas cut and moved huge blocks of stone to build the village temple. To pass their time, the Pandavas built the lake, the bund, and the kodi. Still waiting for the rice to cook, they played a game of Anchankal with boulders on the lake bed. These boulders could still be seen in summer when the lake was dry. Lost in thought, Lakshmamma suddenly realized that she had arrived at the Thope, or what she realized in shock had once been the Thope. The Thope she remembered did not have either a gate or a fence. It had also looked like a forest with trees, towering mango and jamun that her grandfather had told her were more than 200 years old. When she entered the Thope, she saw that it had become a park like the park she had seen in the city. Now the Thope was fenced with barbed wire and entry was through a wrought iron gate. Even more shocking to Lakshmamma was that she could hardly see any of the old trees. In the park near her home, there were trees people had called royal palms. These trees looked a little like the coconut trees, but unlike the coconut, the leaves of the royal palm were of little use, and neither did the tree bear any useful fruit. She saw paved footpaths crisscrossing the park, an open hall in the center, and a number of cement benches. Lakshmamma also saw some strange looking machines where there were 3 thick trunked mango trees that had stood. She later found that people used them for exercising. There were ornamental plants where the yucca had grown wild. The undergrowth her goats had loved to graze on was replaced by lawn grass. Everything looked neat and in place and very strange. Recovering from her initial shock, Lakshmamma noticed a majestic looking peepal tree, and the sight of the tree gladdened her. The peepal tree stood on a katte. At the base of the tree were nagar kallus. This was a familiar tree to Lakshmamma. She had spent many hours under the shade of the peepal, sometimes in silence and other times chattering to the tree about things of great importance to a child. Maranna, she had fondly called the tree. Standing under the tree, she heard the rustle of the leaves that seemed to speak to her.
Maranna, what has happened here? Where is your companion, the neem? Where are your many friends, the jamun and the mango trees?
The rustle of the leaves became louder, and a soft and sad voice replied,
Who is this? Someone long ago used to call me by this name. I remember a young girl, but who are you?
Lakshmamma realized that Maranna had not recognized her. How would he? It had been a very long time.
Maranna, it's me, Lakshmamma, the little girl who used to visit you every day with her goats. I am, of course, much older now.
Lakshmamma, is that really you? You have grown so big and old. It has indeed been a very long time. It is good to see you. But yes, Lakshmamma, all my old friends have gone.
Lakshmamma was worried at how sad Maranna sounded.
It's good to see you too. While walking here, I saw that so much has changed. I could hardly recognize our village anymore.
The village that Lakshmamma grew up in was rather small, with less than 50 families living in it. The closest village seemed to be miles away. In addition to the Kalyani she had walked past on her way to the Thope, there was an Ashwata Katte at the village center. There were also wells and small ponds in different parts of the village whose water was used for cooking, washing and bathing. Some of the wells were still there, but the ponds had filled up long ago. The village had a lake around which paddy, ragi and vegetables were grown. The lake dried up in summer, leaving small slushy pools in the center. Buffaloes loved to wallow in these pools on hot summer days, while cows, sheep and goats came to the pools to quench their thirst. When the lake filled up after the rains, children would go swimming, catching fish. Grass grew thick around the lake and cattle were brought here to graze every day. Now, Lakshmamma saw that the lake still existed with some cattle grazing. There was no sign of any cultivation, no rice, ragi, or vegetables. The round stepwell near the lake held some water, but it looked dirty and stank. Empty bottles and plastic wrappers floated on the surface. What Lakshmamma remembered most fondly were the Gunda Thopes. Her village had 4 thopes, and the one she stood in now had been her favorite. She wondered what had happened to the other thopes. Maranna seemed to read her thoughts and said,
The other Thopes have all gone. The crows told me about it. The trees were cut up to set up a school and for building houses. Only one of the banyan trees still stands in the corner of the school compound.
Where do the villagers now meet for festivals and family occasions?
The last time the Raunamimi feast was held here in this Thope was 9 years ago.
Lakshmamma was surprised. Ramnavami was one of the festivals where the entire village would come together, cook a feast, and share the meal under the shade of the trees in the Thope. Children played and climbed trees while the elders talked under the shade. For as long as she could remember, the entire village celebrated Ramnavami together, so she was surprised to hear that the festival was no longer held.
What about the nomadic community that used to come and stay at this top every year?
Who? The fortune tellers. They have stopped coming even earlier. No one needs fortune tellers now. You can know all you want about your fortune through TV programs. No one comes here like before. See, they have put a fence all around. Why? People, even birds and the bats have stopped visiting the Thope. They just fly overhead.
Lakshmamma remembered the fruit trees well, especially the mango tree. She and her friends were often scolded for trying to climb the mango trees by priests and village elders, as the trees in the Thope were believed to be the abode of God. She also remembered the taste of the sour mangoes brought down with a stone and eaten with salt and chili powder that Lakshmamma and her friends took with them when they brought the goats to graze at the Thope. Lakshmamma looked at the Nagarkallus in the shade of Maranna's canopy and asked,
They seem to have spared the Nagar Kallus. Do the women from the village still come here to pray?
Some of them still do, but not as often as before. I miss listening to their conversations. Now people come for exercise, walk briskly, and leave. Some sit on the benches and talk for a while. But people can only enter for a few hours in the morning and evening. The gate is locked for the rest of the day. The afternoons are especially lonely. With no grazers resting here, no women coming to collect firewood, or children climbing trees to pluck mango and jamun on their way back from school. Did you see the rules they have now? So many of them. And what you can do and not do in this Thope.
Lakshmamma was wondering how the Thopes with their many trees, so special to the village, had come to this state. She sat down on the katte and said,
Our village loved these Thopes so much and took such good care of the trees. The Thope was also so useful for the wood, fruits, for grazing. What happened to them, Maranna?
Times have changed, and with it people's needs and thinking. It began with a storm when one huge banyan tree fell in the Thope, where the school stands today. The people said there was no use planting any new trees, as there was a law saying that people could no longer cut trees or branches without permission from the government. They decided to build a school instead on the same land. When other trees fell in the Thope, close to the school, the villagers decided to build houses in that space. Only this Thope remained, and for a long time nothing happened. Then suddenly one day, there was a flurry of activity and many important looking people came to this Thope. They spoke in loud voices and used chains to measure the land. A few days later, machines began to dig up the earth and people came in to work on the land. I watched as the building came up in the corner where the two large mango trees stood. A few more trees were cut and the veterinary hospital you see now was built.
No one objected. I know the Patel and Shanberg are no longer responsible for village affairs. But what about the panchayat and all the villagers?
Lakshmamma knew that in the past it was the Patel and Shanbag who took decisions regarding the common lands in the village, such as the Thop, Lake, and Gomala. In the past, in Thopes, the practice was to plant a new tree whenever a tree fell. Villagers were not allowed to cut trees. Cutting branches were permitted, but only with the permission of the Patel and Shanbag. Lakshmamma also knew that the Patel and Shanbag were not always fair. Their decisions sometimes gave preference to one person or a particular group. Still, this had been the system in the village and had been accepted by all. This old system was no longer in force. Now the villages in the outskirts of Bengaluru had panchayats, and those villages that had become part of the city's municipality came under the walls.
There was a lot of discussion. The villagers had many heated arguments. They decided that it would be nice if they could have a park in the village, like the other localities in Bengaluru had. Our village is most a part of Bangalore today, and many go to work in the city. They saw the parks neatly laid out with exercise equipment, benches, and lawns, and wanted something similar.
Lakshmamma was thoughtful. She had seen a number of new homes and multi-storied apartments in her village while walking towards the Thop.
Yes, times have changed, and the people living here too have changed. Maybe that is why everyone wants a park now for exercise. We had enough exercise grazing goats and climbing trees.
Maranna bristled and the people leaves shook even more.
It is not just the new residents. Ask the children of families who have lived here for decades if they know what a Thop is and where it was located. They say it is always a park, and the children and the youth even ask, "What is a Thop?"
Maranna slowly calmed down. He said to Lakshmamma,
I am glad you came to see me though, and still remembered the Thop. I wish people would still plant and care for trees in this Thop as they did in the past.
Lakshmamma thought sadly of her grandchildren growing up in the city, in a crowded slum with no Thop to run around in or trees to climb. These thoughts still occupying her mind, Lakshmamma suddenly realized that the sun was setting. She was alone in the park, except for a couple walking briskly on a paved path, clearly in the middle of their evening exercise. It was time for her to leave too. She had to go home and return to the city the next day. Lakshmamma was filled with sadness. She looked up at Maranna and said,
I have to go now. I don't know when I will see you again. I will ask my brother to plant a neem tree next to you. And I hope the tree will be a companion for you in the years to come. I will pray at the katte near my house in the city that you will be protected and live long.
The leaves of the people seemed to stand still. Maranna said,
Thank you, Lakshmamma, for thinking of me. Do plant more trees in the city, in parks, schools, along roads, around lakes maybe. I am sure there are still some lakes in the city. I am so happy that you came by to talk to me.
As the sun set, a few crows flew down onto the cutting. A bat flitted among the leaves of the people, picking at the right figs. Lakshmamma got up to leave. Walking back home through a very changed landscape, she knew that at least tonight Maranna would not be alone. The crows that had come to roost would keep Maranna company.
So what are Gunda Thopes? Gunda Thopes are wooded grooves that were once found across villages in Karnataka. These grooves used to be planted by local villagers with trees such as mango, jamun, peepal, banyan, ippe, and tamarind. The Thopes had many uses for the village community. The wood from the trees, especially of the mango, was used to make doors and window frames for village homes and also to repair the temple. The poor in the village, who did not own any land on which they could grow trees, were allowed to use the branches as fuel wood for marriages and cremations. Wood from fallen trees and tamarind were collected and auctioned, and the money collected was used to fund development work in the village. The Thopes were a shaded sanctuary for grazers and their livestock. After grazing and watering their animals in the lake, the grazers would herd their cows, goats, or sheep to the Thope. While the grazers dozed under the canopy, their animals would lazily nibble on the grass in the Thope. The fruits of the mango and jamun were like magnets attracting children from the village. The children would climb the jamun trees to shake down the fruit that they ate till their tongues turned purple. They would aim and bring down the mangoes with stones, eating the raw mangoes with salt and chili powder. Mangoes were also shared among the houses in the village, and pickle of different varieties were made and stored throughout the year. The villagers also collected seeds of the ippe, dried them, and extracted oil to light lamps.
The villagers gathered for meetings and festivals at the Thopes. Some Thopes had small shrines and nagarkalus that were worshipped. Families also prayed to their household deity, represented in the form of stones placed at the base of the trees, anointed with turmeric and vermilion. Wandering nomadic future fortune tellers set up temporary huts under the canopy of the trees in the Thope. The Thope was just not a place for people. Birds, animals, insects, and spiders could all be found on the trees and in the undergrowth. The cacophony of the mynas and squirrels during the day was replaced by the cawing cows when they came to roost in the trees at dusk. Bats arrived later with their high-pitched squealing, coming in for the night shift to feast on the insects and fruits. Sadly, these Thopes have now begun to disappear, especially in the villages located close to cities, such as Bengaluru. As a city grows, the population increases and the need for space also increases. As a result, Thopes are converted to schools, bus stands, houses, community halls, and roads. Some Thopes are being landscaped and converted to parks. What remains of the Thopes are only a few trees.
The Thopes that the villagers took care of as a community now look degraded and uncared for, with hardly any trees left. Garbage and construction debris is dumped in and around the Thopes. Even more saddening is the way in which the Thopes seem to have faded from the memory of people. Our cities are fast losing their tree cover, but we need to preserve the Thopes with their trees in the cities, for the grazers to bring their cattle, for children to climb and relish the fruit, and for the elderly to have a quiet place to walk and meet. As our cities become hotter, Thopes provide much needed shade and respite from heat. Trees help settle dust and absorb polluting gases which we otherwise end up breathing. What can we do to protect these Thopes and the trees that are so important? We could start by getting to know more about the trees around us. We could also see where we can plant trees in our cities and how we can care for them. We need to cherish trees, not just because they are useful to us, but because the city with its canopies is a part of an imagination for a better life, a beautiful and inspiring sight in an otherwise drab, grey, and polluted city landscape.
Hi, my name is Seema and I'm a faculty at the Azim Premji University where I teach ecology. What you just heard was a brilliant reading by Supriya, Divya and Harin about a Gunda Thope in a village around Bangalore. And yes, this is a fictitious story, but the site
where the stope exists is actually one of our field sites, and we have been following how the stope had transformed from across many years, from when it was a grove with around 54 huge trees of mango and jamun, and to finally when it became a park. So the story of the story is, as Harini said, we have been doing research on Gunda Thopes in Bangalore. And yes, our research has been published in peer-reviewed papers, but one of the main questions that we wanted to ask was, that has always bothered us, is how do we communicate our research to the wider public? And how can we collaborate with people in protecting nature in cities like the Gunda Thopes? So it was with that idea in mind that we thought of doing this booklet on Gunda Thopes. And interestingly, the illustrations in the book have been done by our students at the university and a colleague of ours. So what we did was that we shared the field notes from our research, we shared photographs of our research, and they created the characters and they created all the illustrations in the book. So whatever you see in the book, whatever they read in the book about the lakes, the Kalyanis, everything is true, and it is there in that village in the outskirts of Bangalore. And we also then translated this into 2 languages, in Kannada and Hindi. So they are available as bilingual booklets on the Azim Premji University website. We are also very happy that copies of this book are available in rural libraries across Karnataka. And we hope that if you ever get a chance, you will be able to visit one of these libraries and see if the book is also available there.